My name is Kailey Lopez, and before I dive in, I wanted to just give some context to this presentation. So I worked on this with Dr. Sarah Erickson during my undergraduate years at Trinity University. And so unfortunately, she could not be here today. She wanted me to let y'all know that after receiving a positive COVID test, she's at home quarantine. So send good energy and good vibes her way for a speedy recovery for sure. But she also wanted me to mention that Dr. Erickson, and I quote, is very disappointed to miss this conference and would love to chat with anyone about the project when she's back on her feet. Feel free to email her at that email address. She also wants you to know that Kailey was an amazing research assistant and that she will do a great job representing her work. So thank you, Dr. Erickson, if you are watching. I appreciate it. Accusations of sexual assault are often falling into this category as he said, she said situations in which the credibility of the accusation is entirely dependent on who is to be believed. And who is to be believed is often dependent on gender. So questions about belief around sexual assault have made national headlines in recent years, as you can see from the screen, with the rise of the Me Too movement and significant reporting on sexual abuses of power in Hollywood, politics, and other arenas. So when looking at this research, we asked how might we account for these responses to the experiences of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence? What is the credibility of survivors who are predominantly women, which is often the first line of attack when defending against accusations of gender-based violence? Sarah Weiser and Higgins described this gap in credibility between survivors and perpetrators as part of this larger economy of believability in which marginalized populations are granted less capital than the default white cisgendered man. These authors also argue that this inequitable structure of economies of believability are formed, reinforced, and defended through popular culture around us. So fictional representations of gender and sexual violence may promote the view that women's and survivors' credibility is inherently unstable and emphasize empathy for other teenagers that are once being accused of assault. These representations may be especially salient in adolescents, and mass media targeting adolescents should be of particular concern, as many adolescents lack direct experience with romantic relationships, and this can often lead them to turn to media narratives to learn about these relationships. So in this paper and the research that we did, we looked at one particular insidious example of the economy of believability at work in adolescent series. And so we looked at the wildly popular Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. And although there have been other, popular media forms that have been analyzed, we argue that gender violence and belief provides a relevant case study within 13 Reasons Why with real clear world connections. And so we wanted to see how we could consider believability as being capitalized along gender lines in its narrative. The show's narrative also centers directly on the questioning of truth and who can and should be believed. And so as I get more into the show, there will be some discussion of sexual assault, gender violence. So I just wanted to give that warning. So 13 Reasons Why began as a novel written by G. Asher in 2011 and was later adapted into the Netflix television series 13 Reasons Why in 2017. And this narrative tells the story of Hannah Baker, who is a high school student and commits suicide, leaving behind 13 reasons why she ultimately committed suicide. So we see in the first season this narrative that follows her friend, Clay Jensen, as he listens to the tape and navigates his own grief and his own grief within this relationship. The following seasons further explore the fallout from Hannah's suicide and multiple characters' experiences of gender violence within the show. So since its initial release, 13 Reasons Why has generated significant discussion and controversy surrounding its depiction of teen suicide and bullying. There was a very prominent scene that very graphically depicted Hannah's suicide and actually was removed by the show 2 years in 2019. So a lot of scholars have looked at how suicide contagion and the impact of viewing such graphic scenes, or even just engaging with the suicide narrative, what that might look like on having an impact on young viewers. But they often skimmed over the show's intense depictions of gender-based violence. So we wanted our research to examine the ways in which this series deals with the accusations of rape and other forms of gender violence in the first 2 seasons, and consider how the narrative presented might influence different structures of believability. So for the purpose of this project, we define gendered or gender-based violence as certain forms of violence, most prominently sexual and intimate partner violence, that are gendered or perpetrated based on gender. Gendered violence is a common occurrence in early romantic relationships. So beyond direct experience with gendered violence, adolescents are also learning about romantic relationships during this developmental period. Young adolescents develop a sense of norms and expectations around romantic relationships, including what is abusive, what is healthy, based on experiences with various socializing agents, which include, peers, parents, community, religion, and of course, media. So Kate Mann identifies 2 specific ways in which gender and credibility are intertwined within the specific context of gender violence. So first, she describes our societal tendency to empathize with men accused of violence and to frame our assessment of the situation in terms of what he must be going through, a phenomenon that she termed empathy. And second, she highlights the unequal assessment of witness in a judicial setting, which provides more socially powerful witnesses with greater credibility, which is an example of what she calls testimonial injustice. We see this testimonial injustice play out in the different ways in which men accused of violence and women survivors of violence are questioned by police and in courtrooms, as well as in broader societal discourse. So further from this, Sarah Benet-Weiser describes the economy of believability as a commodity that exists within a particular cultural economy. And within this economy, subjects are unevenly positioned to access and harness this believability and struggles over truth in the public culture. These subjects are positioned within the economy of believability, similar to a traditional economy. Benet-Weiser highlights the inverse relationship of labor and resources that emerge from this economy of believability. So the more resources one has access to, such as structures of privileges, gender, race, class, etc., the easier it is to obtain believability within the economy. This framework sheds light on the notion that truth has been synonymous with the historical role of men. The study further examines the phenomena of empathy, testimonial injustice, and the economy of believability, which in turn serve to prop up rape culture and misogyny as they are present in the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. So examining the complex and nuanced issues of gender violence, power, and credibility in 13 Reasons Why required a multi-methodological approach involving an in-depth explanation of the text, informed by feminist and cultural theory, and an understanding of the construction of meaning when engaging with the text. This is achieved through a combination of narrative discourse analysis on the way in which gender, sexuality, and power are constructed throughout the text. Jeez. It happens. I'm ready. I know what that is. So the first 2 seasons of the series were analyzed in this manner. Season 1, 13 Reasons Why, follows the plot of Asher's book, like I mentioned, Kailey receives Hannah's suicide tapes, and over the course of 13 episodes, listens to each of them. The season depicts the impact of Hannah's suicide on her classmates, parents, teachers, while also providing context for each decision to end her life. This season includes depictions of bullying, sexual assault, relationship violence, and sexual harassment, which, as mentioned, ends with that really graphic suicide. Season 2 of 13 Reasons Why goes beyond the original text of J. Asher and covers a civil trial in which Hannah's parents are suing Liberty High School for the part that they may have played in Hannah's death. Each episode is presented from the perspective of a different character's testimony and trial. Hannah's narrative from season 1 is challenged and complicated when the other characters in the show tell their side of the story and go ahead and fill in those blanks. The second season deals with the fallout of sexual assault allegations for the victim, the accused, and the systems that we see support both of them. This emphasis in this season is on finding the truth behind Hannah's death. Gender violence was a consistent presence throughout both the first and second seasons that we analyzed in 13 Reasons Why. The character Bryce Walker in 13 Reasons Why is a prime example of the ways in which gender violence, sympathy, and the economy of believability play out within the narrative. Bryce is a serial rapist that has raped Hannah and 2 other women within the show. The narrative often serves to humanize Bryce throughout the series and portray him as a victim that we as viewers should identify with and empathize with. Throughout the series, we see numerous instances of how his character perpetuates rape culture, misogyny, and we also see his privileged position within the economy of believability. It's important to note this character exemplifies much of our analysis and framework, which will be discussed in just a moment. But our analysis of season 1 and 2 of 13 Reasons Why, 13 Reasons Why's engagement with power, gender, and credibility revealed a clear 4-step process which systematically undermines the experiences and emotions of women and props up the reputations and honesty of men within the series. These steps involve intentional ambiguity around the idea of truth, discrediting women, promoting empathy with the cis men, and supporting the truth as presented by men. So first, defining truth as malleable. Early in the first episode of season 1, as Clay listens to Hannah's first tape, Hannah describes her reasoning for including 13 tapes in her suicide message. Quote, "There are 13 sides to every story," she said. This statement sets up a clear theme throughout the series that truth is relative and really depends on a character's point of view. Tony, who is Clay's friend and a confidant of Hannah's, who is left in charge of making sure all of the people on the tapes listen to them, tells Clay that he believes Hannah is telling her truth when Clay questions the story on the tape. This theme continues throughout the series, especially during the trial that we see take place in season 2, when each of the individual characters is provided with the opportunity to testify and tell, quote, their truth. For the sake of time, these are only 2 examples of the malleability of truth in the show. This combination of suggesting truth is relative and subjective and questioning whether knowing or finding out the truth is possible or really even matters provides an underlying logic to the series that truth is malleable and none of the characters' points of view can really be trusted. By destabilizing truth as a construct, the series sets itself up to make credibility and belief and the questioning of credibility and belief a major focus throughout the narrative. So the second step is dismissing women's emotional experiences and perceptions. This was the next step in developing an ideology of believing men and questioning women, which is to discredit the experiences of women. Mann argues that in order to accuse someone of sexual assault, it is necessary to position oneself as a victim and that the dominant narratives around victimhood serve to undermine the legitimacy of a victim's claims. Mann's argument about the systematic way in which victims are positioned and suspect plays out in 13 Reasons Why through dismissing and managing women's emotions, directly questioning women's versions of events, and undermining the credibility of women in the series. Women's emotions throughout 13 Reasons Why are depicted as either dangerous or overdramatic. Hannah's portrayal as an overdramatic teen girl is highlighted by her friend Tony, who says, Hannah was a lot. She was a lot of drama. And even her own mother, who often says things like, my dear Hannah, such drama. And this dismissal of Hannah's emotional experiences is paired with direct challenges to Hannah's versions of events, both implicit and explicit. In season 1, Hannah's story is directly questioned 44 times, either through directly calling her a liar or describing an alternative version of events. So at the same time that the morality and credibility of the women in the series are being questioned, Viewers are also positioned to empathize and identify with the emotional experiences of men within the narrative. For example, the character of Clay Jensen narrates the entire series and the original book by Jay Asher. Viewers perceive and understand the stories through Clay's emotional experiences of his friend's death. Clay is positioned as the hero of the story on a quest to get justice for Hannah, and this aligns with common narrative techniques in stories about sexual assault, which tend to focus on the emotional experiences of the husband, the partner, the boyfriend, etc. of the victim. Viewers are also asked to identify with more traditionally masculine characters in the series, and to see these men as suffering and possibly victims of an unfair system. Bryce is depicted as the victim of malicious women who are jealous of him or angry that he didn't want to be with them. Bryce's baseball coach demonstrates his interpretation of the accusations as, quote, "I'm sick of these athletes always being the targets," in reference to sexual assault allegations, etc. Identification with the men accused of sexual assault, like Bryce Walker, can be seen as a prime example of empathy. Ultimately, the final step in undermining the experiences of women involves elevating the experiences of men. The manner in which Bryce's truth is not questioned reinforces the notion that men are positioned highly within this economy of believability, thus placing him at an advantage when Hannah's truth is revealed. The intersection of Bryce's position within the economy of believability and the portrayal of his character as someone to identify and empathize with encourages viewers to believe him over Hannah. This believability is being given freely to Bryce, whereas Hannah is expected to earn hers. This experience of silencing women in favor of men and privileging men's versions of events can be described as a form of testimonial injustice. Men, as inherently more socially powerful than women, are to be believed, while women are to be questioned. Bryce outlines this principle nicely in season 1, stating, "Who's going to believe the dead girl, right? You know the real story, right? You know it's true," to one of his friends, and to which the friend responds affirming to Bryce's version of the story. And this essentially, in other words, is Bryce saying, "My definition of what happened is what matters, and in my version, my actions were justified. Period. His truth is to be believed." Throughout the first 2 seasons of 13 Reasons Why, the legitimacy of Hannah Baker's story and the trustworthiness of survivors and women in general is systematically undermined and challenged. This rejection of truth as told by women is accomplished through the 4 concrete steps that were discussed. The lessons learned from a show like 13 Reasons Why and the ways in which viewers are asked to identify with and relate to the characters can have a lasting impact on how adolescents think about sexual assault, credibility, and rape culture. Particularly when it comes to a complex moral issue or ethical issues like gender violence, viewers turn to the media to make sense of the world around them and think through the implications of content, including these issues. In the case of 13 Reasons Why, viewers, which are largely adolescents, are being asked to engage in empathy and endorse the testimonial injustice between men and women, further solidifying and reinforcing rape culture and misogyny. The creators of 13 Reasons Why have argued that their show is designed to raise these challenging questions and difficult topics, providing unflinching descriptions of the hurt that teens can go through, such as anxiety, bullying, assault, depression, and suicide, and to help lift the stigmas young people increasingly experience growing up today. While it's certainly true that the depictions of the realities of sexual and gender violence are important, and silence is not the appropriate response to these phenomena, the depiction presented by the series does little to actually move the conversation forward. Although the producers do in fact bring up these difficult topics, like sexual assault, and the premise of the show seems to set privileging Hannah's side of the story, the way in which the narrative unfolds serves to bolster patriarchal myths about sexual assault and harassment. Ultimately, this narrative devalues the lived experiences of women and others who do not conform to traditional gender roles or uphold the norms of misogyny. 13 Reasons Why is not a show about a girl in pain. This is a show characterized by overt misogyny and support for rape culture. Systematic disbelief of the stories of women and other survivors of gendered violence is a critical cultural problem, and narratives like 13 Reasons Why only further aggravate this issue.